Welcome to the Counselling Tutor Podcast, the must-listen-to podcast for students of counselling and psychotherapy. Here are your hosts, Rory Lees-Oakes and Ken Kelly.
Hello and welcome to this special edition of the Counselling Tutor Podcast. I'm Rory and Ken is taking a well-earned break. I'm joined today by Letizia Perna, who is the Director of Services for Winston's Wish charity. So, Letizia, you're very welcome.
Hello, Rory. Lovely to be here.
So just tell us a little bit about Winston's Wish. What's Winston's Wish about?
Of course. So Winston's Wish is the first childhood UK bereavement charity. We are 30 years old this year, which is quite exciting. And we are effectively support and advice and guidance for children and young people 0 to 25 who have lost someone important to them, as well as the adults, whether that be parents or family members and friends or professionals who support them. So we provide bereavement support in a plethora of ways, as well as advice and guidance around talking about death and dying.
Well, a very serious topic, but a very needed resource, and you know, what a fantastic charity to support young people. So, in terms of prevalence of childhood bereavement, you know, what are the statistics?
Yeah, that's a great question, Rory, and one that is actually really hard to answer, and I'll tell you in a little bit why. But to give you a sense, roughly, we have about nearly 1 million 0 to 25-year-olds in the UK may have experienced the death of a parent, brother, or sister. So quite significant numbers. More than 100 children and young people are bereaved of a parent every single day in the UK. And 1 in 20 children and young people have experienced the death of the parent by the age of 16. So if you put it all in all, we're thinking that there's about one child in every class who suffered the bereavement of a parent or sibling. If we think even more about some statistics, in 2021, there were 5,583 suicides that were registered in England and Wales. And many of those folks left behind bereaved children. If we look at homicide data, for example, there were 721 homicide deaths in England and Wales in 2021. Again, leaving behind many bereaved children and young people. If we look at children with special needs, it is estimated that there's 44,496 children who are bereaved of a parent in the UK with special needs. And the reason why I say it's a really actual difficult conversation to have about statistics is that no one actually really knows how many children are bereaved each year. And the reality of that is that data is collected each year on deaths, but we don't register how many children and dependents are attached to those deaths. So there are so many more children that are not accounted in any of those figures that are just thrown at you that we know are bereaved and going through grief in any present given time.
I mean, the statistic that sticks with me, Letizia, is 1 in 20. 1 in 20. If you think of you think of 20 people and a cohort in a school and a classroom, that is huge. And one of the things that I've realised in my time as a school counsellor is that grief presents differently in children than it does in adults. And I wonder if you could help us to kind of get a sense of how grief might present in children.
Yeah, no, absolutely. You're absolutely right, Rory. So the reality is absolutely children don't have the same level of understanding about death as adults. And for children of all ages, you know, death takes different meanings with each level of development, if you will. So if we think about really little children, for example, and we think about the concept of object permanence, that is not something that has sort of been, you know, ingrained in their psyche. So they don't understand. What is this death? What do you mean people don't come back? Everything comes back in my world. So one, talking about it with them is really tricky. but also helping them understand. So, for example, for little children, we often say a good place to start is to help them begin to make sense of what is this thing called life and what is this thing called death. And a brilliant way to sometimes do that is to use the beauty of nature. So looking at, for example, the way leaves change from spring when they're beautiful and green to when fall comes around and they're brown and in the ground, and beginning to think about sort of the parallels of life and death. But again, as they develop, their understanding of death changes. So object permanence becomes something that obviously they understand more. But then there are other issues such as, what is this thing called death? And what do you mean I can't speak to people? And what is these words that you guys use? Because we don't often use the word death in society. We shy away from it. It's still a taboo. So we talk about people being lost. Well, let's go find them, children think. Or people passing away in their sleep, and children thinking, right, well, I don't want to go to sleep. That sounds awful. So there's things in societies that we do that don't actually help children understand this whole thing about death and dying.
I'd like to pick up on that because I think that's really interesting. You know, one of the things that I began to understand when I did my child therapy course, and also bereavement that had a child bereavement module in, is the use of clean language when you're working with children. And clean language isn't the absence of profanity. It is being very, very, very precise when you're speaking to children, because they don't have the vocabulary, the dexterity of vocabulary to understand the nuances. So passed away, gone to the next room, that type of thing. There was a very kind of unfortunate advert in the 90s when AIDS was very prevalent, and one of the parts of the advert is "Don't die of ignorance," and there were children asking the teachers, "What is this ignorance, and how do I get it?" And you know, the use of clean language is just so important, isn't it? The idea that you're working at their level.
Absolutely. And that's what we always talk about, you know, when we're talking with adults, whether it be professionals or parents or carers, is really simple, age-appropriate language that is factual. So, you know, the details are not really significant. It's kind of keeping things simple so that they can understand. But we also really reflect about the importance of having these conversations and having these conversations in a really open and honest way, which understandably for us adults, one, we don't use the word death. We find that word really hard. And then talking about death is a whole other level. And then you add having to talk about death with children. Yeah, we run a mile from that. And what we're really saying is actually, kids are really smart. They will pick up on so many clues, and they will probably hear about some of this stuff. So take the opportunity, model really good behavior, and absolutely, Rory, help them, give them the language to talk about their feelings. You know, that weird rumbling belly feeling that one might feel after someone has died. Important to help them give a language. Name it sadness, name it despair, name it whatever it may be, anxiety, confusion, whatever it may be. These are all adult words. Kids don't come with that vocabulary. And it's really important, you know, in our eyes that adults are modeling that behavior and allowing for those conversations that are so incredibly important to happen. Because we do know that obviously if bereavement isn't dealt with, it can have significant impacts in later life. And equally, the understanding, which is really important, that for children and young people, grief, and for adults, grief is a journey. And with that, for children particularly, as they go through the various developmental stages, their understanding will change, but so will their emotions, so will the memories, so will their entire grief journey. So the importance is also continuing to have those conversations and continuing to allow those open spaces for that discussions around feelings and memories to really be available.
Yeah, and I you know, sort of echoing all the training that I've done through the years, I want to pick up on, I think, what is a really important point you made, where you talk about labelling emotions. You know, emotions, the vocabulary of emotion has to be taught to children. In my experience, it's not something that children have emotions, but without a label and an explanation and some context, it can be very confusing. And I think it's very useful to, you know, if a child has a feeling, to try and put a label on it so they know what it is. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, no, I'm totally with you, Rory. Absolutely. As I said, emotion labels are an adult created thing. Children don't come with that. If you think about infancy, you laugh or you cry. There's no much color, but actually emotions have so much color. And absolutely, I think it's around helping children understand whatever it is that they might be feeling, what that's called. And absolutely, giving a name is the first step of beginning to understand it and calling it out. No, absolutely. We often have sort of sheets with various different pictures that kind of show your emotions. And sometimes it's not for younger children. It's just about that face resembles what I feel. It is really important to begin to give that vocabulary and that language to them, because it will follow them also in later life. Bereavement is loss, and we all suffer different losses throughout our lives. So it's really setting them up for success and the ability to cope with these things as life unfolds, really.
Yeah, absolutely. And I've observed through the years that one of the things that happens with grief is that children can be alienated. They feel that there's no one for them. And, ultimately, and I speak from loss in my family many, many years ago, it changed the family dynamic considerably.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I'll never forget. I'll give you an example of when I was practicing many, many years ago, when I started practicing, actually. And I worked in a school too, so school counselors united. Yeah, but I had this young man who was 16, bereaved of his dad 3 years prior. And when we started working together, he often talked to me about how lonely he felt, because the reality was that none of his friends understood what it was like to be without a dad. But also that his relationship with mom had changed. Dad had been the one who set the rules. Mom was always the go-to that would find ways to flex. And all of a sudden, dad was gone, and mom was making rules, and mom wasn't being flexible. So actually what dad's death had done for him is also take away the mom he'd known. And I thought that was the most insightful thing, as someone who was training, to hear a 16-year-old speak so eloquently about the impact of what his father's death had done for him in his life was absolutely an eye-opener. And that theme has been retold in multiple ways by so many children that we work with. If we think back to that statistic of 1 in 20, how many kids can look around their classroom and go, oh, yes, there's a fellow pupil who's also lost an important person. And never mind children who've experienced the loss of someone special through some traumatic manners, whether it be accidents or sudden deaths or death by suicide. That's even more so an alienating experience for them. So, yeah, absolutely.
Yes, and sometimes young people lack the general language to express themselves, don't they? And that can then play out in changes of behaviour, more distressing behaviour. Yeah.
Yeah, no, absolutely. What we know is that grieving children can experience anxiety, depression, and mental health issues. Now, I always say bereavement is not mental health. We know that actually most people and most young children and young people who are bereaved will manage their grief journey just fine with the support and care of the family, friends, and family that they have around them. But definitely for some, particularly those that are prone to mental health issues, who have existing mental health issues, there can be really a compounding impact on that. But we also know that grieving children experience often difficulties at school. We know that children also sometimes may display and demonstrate risky or disruptive behaviors. We know that trouble sleeping is something that they report at a lot. But we also know, and again, we talk about the long-term impact of bereavement, but we also know that grieving children are also at an increased risk of youth offending. And as well as you mentioned earlier, the long-term impacts of possibly relationship problems, family breakdowns, as well as failure in education and employment. These are all things that, unfortunately, unresolved grief can lead to.
Yes, and I think the key thing for me there is unresolved grief, because all those behaviours can play out, and sometimes we can misinterpret a child's behaviour for being, I hate that word, naughty.
I know.
They're being naughty when actually they're trying to express themselves in the only way they know how. Children, children exist in different societies, and one of the big societies or groups that they exist in is schools. How does grief impact children in terms of being at school, their relationships with teachers and peers?
Yeah, no, that's an absolutely great question. So first and foremost, you're absolutely right. I cannot tell you how many teachers and professionals call us and say, so little Johnny is being disruptive in class and not listening and being a troublemaker. And actually, we've dug deep and there's been a loss and he could use to talk to someone. So absolutely, sometimes changes in behaviors in school, concentration is obviously impacted. But we also find that children begin to have sometimes problems with their peer relationships. So I just talked last week to a 10-year-old boy whose friends were laughing at him because he doesn't have a mum anymore. And what he shared with me was, these are not really my friends. Why would they laugh? And so what he's doing is retrieving back from those relationships, which, as we know, for a 10-year-old boy, your friends are your entire world. So again, we come back to that topic of isolation. But a massive impact, because effectively children withdraw from those support networks and then feel even further along in their grief. So brilliant to be able to effectively have one school counselors that offer children a place to talk, parents and family members that are engaged with them, and obviously charities like our own who provide them with some of that much needed space to talk and to get some support.
Absolutely. And I know we have a huge amount of therapists who listen to this podcast, but we also know we have a lot of the general public, other professionals from social work, teaching, medical profession. You know, our colleagues in the police and ambulance service occasionally send us a lovely letter in the mailbag. So what are the issues that we need to raise awareness of the experience? What do professionals need to do to become a little bit more attuned to children who may be experiencing grief?
Yeah, so I think the first thing, Rory, is to remind everybody that grief is a really individual experience. So there's no guidebook, there's no textbook that says, right, this is the blueprint of how people and how children and young people grieve. So it's a completely personal experience, individualized at every step of the way and ever changing. And the other bit that I always add is it's never ending. It used to be that people used to say this horrible thing of time heals all wounds. Well, not quite. That wound is still there. You just learn to cope with that wound a little differently. And the same can be said about children. We often talk about the fact that for children, as they progress through lives, particularly when they hit different milestones, that wound is almost reopened, because actually, if you've lost a mom and dad are meant to be there at all those important things. And actually, when they're not, those old grief feelings can come back. But again, this is all about helping children, one, have a language, two, be able to cope and to speak to someone if they need to about those difficult feelings. But the other thing that I think loads of the kids that we work with tell us is, it hurts now. People don't see me and no one seems to care. And the biggest thing is, obviously, it never stops hurting. And that, I think, sums up in many ways things that as adults we need to be thinking about and providing them really with opportunities to talk about how they're feeling, understand how they're feeling, and equally revisit all those conversations, because it's not a one-off, done, dusted, off we go, carry on with life. That's not how children function. You know, we often get parents call in and say, Johnny keeps asking us these questions and we've just answered them, but we're here and we're asking, you know, he's asking again. Yeah, that's really normal. It's not to be afraid to talk about it and revisit those difficult conversations, which are really hard for adults. But actually, children really need it to help them make sense, truly make sense of what's happened.
Yeah, I mean, I would agree. One of the things that I teach, and one of the things I really believe, is to use the word death, not someone's gone to heaven or has left, or as, you know, because again, these things are really confusing. For children, you know, and sometimes that's harder for the adults to say than it is for the children to receive, in my experience. Yeah. And in terms of the longevity of grief, yes, there are going to be trigger points to a child's life. Could be graduating, could be a birthday, could be a holiday, and that may very well go on to adulthood. you know, where someone's
absolutely.
graduating their university and they're having a picture with one parent and the other parent isn't there. And, you know, again, that's when the button of grief is pressed, I guess.
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. That's an inevitable part of life. And again, it's really around equipping children and young people to understand that, prepare them for that, and giving them what I call, you know, filling their toolbox to be able to cope with that. We're not going to make the pain go away. You know, we just learn to expect that it's going to be a challenging day, make space for it, but also connect with the people who are dead and who have left us. I think that that's a really important and valuable aspect of what moving through grief is about.
Yes, and when we're talking about moving through grief, I think it's really interesting. In a recent podcast, we looked at a specific theory of grief. There's lots of different theories. One that comes up time and time again, and it seems to be taught to every professional who may come into contact with grief, and that's Elizabeth Kubler-Ross's stages of grief. And the reason I'm laughing is that you can't see across the studio monitor. Let's see, he's got a head in her hands. Let's start with the work of Kubler-Ross. Relevant or maybe not relevant? What's your thoughts?
Okay, so lovely Elizabeth Kubler-Ross. Hats off to her. Brilliant. Opened the conversation about death, dying, bereavement. Love it. Fantastic. However, she does, you know, we're now in 2023. We've, psychology and the understanding of the human experience has moved on. And the reality is the 5 stages are a nice guidance, but the reality is we do not move through grief in 5 perfectly placed chronological stages that, you know, seamlessly move through life. And once you're at the end, done, you're dusted, you're good to go. You've done this thing called grief. Congratulations. It doesn't work that way. But again, hats off to her. Great way to start the conversation. And listen, you know, back in the days of Kubler-Ross, it put it on the table as a part and a topic of discussion. But things have moved on. And I'm sure, Rory, in your podcast, you've covered some of the more modern, if you will, theories and understanding around grief and bereavement. One that I often refer to, I mean, there's many, but there's 2 really that I often refer to. And my favorite one is the one around continuing bonds, which is really all about the reality that it's important for us to connect to the people who died in one way or another. There was this, you know, for anyone who's interested and wants to look at some ways that people have done this. Several years ago, after the Japanese tsunami, someone set up a phone box at the site of the tsunami. And it was a phone box to heaven or to the dead. And people would rock up to this phone box, pick up the phone and make a call to their dead loved ones. And what that really is about the need for us living to connect to those who have gone, to maintain that relationship in some shape, way or form, whatever that may be for us. And that is a healthy thing. I cannot tell you how many children, young people, and adults say, I talked to my dad who's died. Am I going crazy? And it's like, no, totally normal. Keep it up. If it helps you, go for it.
Yeah. And in fact, I'll share a little bit about myself. Many years ago, I had a very dear friend who died called Stuart. And I still have his phone number in my diary or on my phone, because we keep our diaries on our phones now. And occasionally, you might find me phoning him up and having a chat, even though the number's disconnected. We may have a bit of a chat. And although I realise that he is no longer, you know, corporeally with us, it is mighty useful to be able to say the things that were unsaid, or just to catch up with what would have been a really great friend had he still be around. So I think that's a really, really good thing, continuing bonds. And also I think a really popular theory, and one I really subscribe to, is the dual process theory.
Yeah, no, I'm totally with you. That's the other one that's on top of my list. And the concept of the dual process theory is actually effectively saying, sorry, Elizabeth, but there's no simple 5 stages. Grief is messy, and we go from one thing to another, and it's completely normal to oscillate between what they call loss-oriented and restoration-oriented. So sometimes you're knee-deep in the grief, you're having a rubbish day, what my clients sometimes call a duvet day, where you don't really want to deal with life because you're just so sad and despair around your loss. Totally fine. Other days, you're having a whale of a time, you're hanging out with your friends, everything's well, and you almost forget that you've suffered this. But that oscillating is really a normal aspect of grieving, and healthy, I dare say, because actually it is really difficult to feel all the difficult emotions of grief day in and day out. It's exhausting. So actually a break is healthy, and it helps you make sense, but it gives you a break from that sort of psychological distress, while also recognizing that life does go on, and it's important for us to find a place within our new life and our new normal that is holding of the memory of our loved ones and incorporates them in our lives, but where we're not sitting under a duvet hiding from the world.
Yeah, I think it's a really good point, and also elicits a permission for clients to be able to do that, so they don't feel bad about themselves. How often have we heard in our therapy rooms, I went out and had a really good time with my friends today, and now I feel really guilty because my dad's died. And it's like, no, don't work that way. It's okay. That's part of it. And I think what I like about the dual process theory, it also gives us a sense of assessment. So occasionally, certainly in my practice, I've seen someone who's stuck in the middle of those, denying that the person had died, becoming disconnected and disorientated, and that gives us an opportunity maybe to refer on if someone is really becoming, shall we say, more mentally unwell, and maybe psychotic with the loss. We can then refer on. Let's just have a bit of a exploration of how we can work creatively with children.
Again, we come back to the world of children don't live in an adult world. They live in their own world, and their own world isn't necessarily through talk. So I think it's really important to think about how we can engage in therapeutic work with children and young people in a way that is more approachable to them, more accessible. So workbooks, so Winston's Wish has a fantastic selection of workbooks that effectively bring out activities that are rather creative, that help children navigate, find language, explore their feelings, but it's through structured activities. We find that children and young people find journaling really helpful to be able to have a place where their thoughts and feelings can just sit there. And then sometimes we review those in sessions to be able to explore, what was going on for you there. Play therapy and art therapy are absolutely brilliant, and we use them quite a lot at Winston's Wish. It is also really helpful to be able to sometimes do sessions with the child and their parent or carer, so really using the family unit to explore feelings. And also in art, from our perspective, part of the work around families is also about helping families have that shared language and that shared environment where this is an okay thing to talk about, where mom, dad, auntie, granny, whoever it may be, is doing that right modeling for that child, has the skills to support them, and there's that open conversation that they're fostering through that openness. And letter writing. So we find loads of our children, again, the continuing ones, love to write letters, keep them up to date. And music. You and I were talking about music before we started recording, but music is an amazing avenue for children. Sometimes it's that special lyric in a song that really hits home. I don't know the words of whatever it may be, but actually that song speaks to me, and it speaks to me about my feelings and what I'm going through. So music has some magical power, I think even for adults, to express the things that sometimes are hardest to say out loud ourselves.
Yes, absolutely. That takes us nicely on to the kind of resources that Winston's Wish offers. And we will put a link to Winston's Wish website in the show notes. So if you go to the special edition, go into the show notes, you'll find a link to Winston's Wish, and you can see the resources. But just kind of share with us how do your services work? What do you offer?
Yeah, sure. So Winston's Wish provides everything from advice through support and at times bereavement counselling for those children who need it. So we have on our website a plethora of resources, activities, advice, even a free 20-minute bereavement training video for anyone who wants to begin to kind of delve in the world of childhood bereavement. We have PSHE lessons for schools to help them open up conversations with children in schools around bereavement, death and dying. And as I say, loads of activities for families to take part in if they wish to do that. So that's kind of the big advice thing. We have a training team that also offers bespoke training as well as ongoing bereavement training for professionals. But the biggest part of our service is really keeping children and young people who are bereaved in mind. So we offer on-demand services for children and young people, and yes, also for those that support them. I think we live in a society where we talk almost too often about the waiting times and waiting lists about accessing services, and we want to do away with that. We want children and young people and those that support them to get the support and advice they need when they need it in the best way that they feel they need it. So we have a helpline that's open from 8 to 8. We also have an ask, email, and a live chat, all accessible to all children and young people and adults who want that support. And some children will come to us every day for a chat over our live chat. Sometimes they come once, get some bit of advice, and off they go. They might come back in months' times. The other element of our support, which again falls in line with a tiered level of bereavement service, is really around some of the more specific and intervention-specific support that comes through bereavement counselling and bereavement support sessions. And that's really through, after an assessment of a child and each child's unique needs, we potentially work with that child through one-to-one sessions, sometimes the child alone, sometimes siblings, sometimes families as a unit, to help foster that understanding and skills, coping skills and communication with that child, but also to give them just a different setting to be able to explore that. And we also have some fantastic groups, targeted groups based on different age groups as well as needs, to really bring that conversation to life, but also to come back to the conversation we had about isolation, to help children feel less alone. So we know the one thing that all our children tell us is the most important thing for them to some extent was meeting someone roughly their age who had a similar experience. And though their experiences and journey will be completely different, just to know that they weren't the only child out there in the world that was bereaved is already a relief. So bringing children together is absolutely part of our mission and part of what we do through our groups.
Well, you've sold me, that's for sure. So if you want to find out a little bit more about what Winston's Wish does, you may want to do a referral. You may want to find some support resources. You may even want to share it with a colleague who's not listening to the podcast, although I believe that people don't listen to our podcast. So if you go to Counselling Tutor and just search Winston's Wish, in the search bar, you'll find the podcast. And you'll be able to access those resources. Finally, Letizia, what are the takeaway messages from working with children? What would you give as a final, if you like, a call to action for those of us who work with bereaved children?
Yeah, so I think for me there's two, and it's rules that we live by, I think, at Winston's Wish. One, really important to normalize bereavement and not pathologize. So that we talk about mental health, I again say bereavement is not the same as mental health. And most children will do just fine through their bereavement journey throughout life with the love and support of friends and family. So, bereavement is normal. It's miserable, but it is normal. And unfortunately, we will all experience that at some point of our lives. But the other big takeaway message, I think, again, at the heart of what we do at Winston's Wish is putting children and young people at the heart of this experience, letting them have a voice and a platform to share their feelings, to be really at the front and center of this journey. And for us, that's really valuable and that's really important. I think long gone, hopefully, are the days where children need permission from parents to get this support. It is about them. It is about creating spaces for them to share, to connect, to be able to put a voice to their emotions and their feelings around death, dying, and bereavement.
Well, I think on that final message, it just remains for me to say thank you so much for joining us. And Letizia, thank you very much.
Thanks, Rory.
Thank you for listening to the Counselling Tutor Podcast. Find the show notes for this episode on our website at www.counsellingtutor.com.